between the first summit and the second summit, and because we are under a big pressure that we have now on Russia Federation regarding the sanctions and the African countries, the call for not supporting Russia, for breaking the relations with Russia, that is shown by the results of UN votes for anti-Russian resolutions, then they create the difficulties for the development of our cooperation. We all understand very well that the African countries are very much interested from their side in the development of the relations with Russia, because they see in Russia not only a very important trade partner, but also a partner, technological partner that will allow Africa to develop in the modern world, not only like in traditional neo-colonial suppression, when all decision, and especially financial decision, because we have dollar domination, this decision are made not in Africa but outside of Africa, but also in humanitarian sphere. So it's also very important. So all questions connected with the development on healthcare, education, culture, national identity, or for the preservation for African countries, it's all very important. And also the agenda that became the general one for us together with African countries. They are connected with the appearance of new forms of colonialism. And we discussed it several times with my colleagues. We discussed this topic because actually now we speak not about neo-colonialism, but new colonialism that have their own form. So the whole agenda that we have for us and for Africa, and it shows to us that we actually are in the same boat together with them. They can teach us, because for a very long time they used all these methods, all the traditional and new methods of suppression. If we unite ourselves with them, then we can solve our solutions. We can keep our national sovereignty and national identity, and then go to the new world that will be more fair than the world where we live now. For our relations to develop in a good way, then it's necessary for us to understand what Africa expects from us, and also to determine what will be the forms or how we will be implement our relations to achieve this or that success. Because for the first summit, there were a lot of hopes and wishes and desires, but besides just one big project that is now implemented by Rosatom in Egypt, we didn't have any significant promotion in an economic way in the African track. Of course, there are separate companies who work there, but we didn't have any breakthrough. We will also discuss it today. Of course, there was pandemic of coronavirus, and then we had special military operation. But unfortunately, I think it is one of the reasons why our development of our relations was not going on. It's the internal agenda in the Russian community. So, yesterday I visited Evgeny Primakov at Radio Sputnik. We were on air, and there were questions for our Russian citizens about Africa. And it's so typical perception of this continent in a Russian mind. So the first question was, so the topic was, of course, they remembered Chukovsky, and it was already the pattern for them. African community says that we should have very talented Russian poet who will write the new poem about Africa. Don't go for a walk to Africa. What do we need in Africa? What did we forget in Africa? We invested so much money in Africa during the Soviet Union, but we didn't get anything from it. And then the third question was, the whole Africa is subdivided into three zones. The first zone was the area that was just a little bit developing. The second zone, stagnated zone, and the third one, the grading zone. So it means that in the previous 20 years, the rates of growth were much higher than the rates of growth of the world economy. But this is the perception. Then there was the great question about the problems of albinos in Africa, and I had so many questions about it. But until we have in our Russian society the clear understanding of what Africa is, why do we need Africa, until we have the understanding that Africa is the continent of the future, and if we now miss the opportunity of the development of relations with Africa, then we will never ever develop ourselves successfully. I always give an example that in 1990 GDP of China was $770 billion, and Ukraine it was $400 billion. So actually, economics of China was just twice as much as Ukraine. But where is China? Where is Ukraine now? And where is our country, though we don't have a big GDP? Yes, it sounds strange, but in 20 years, I think we'll be in the same situation with some African countries. So we will ask them for help, and we will think how to build the relations with them. So to solve the relation, the national problems, not against the African countries, but together with African countries, we need the understanding why do we do it. So let's try to say in our reports not just general words, but we need to say what do we need to do, this and that on the practical way. We spoke a lot about it, us and our institute, for several dozens years. Where should we go? What should we develop? So we need to organize a brainstorm. Where should we concentrate? Because our task is not just to organize the summit Russia-Africa in a successful way, but we need also to cooperate not just from summit to summit. We don't need to have formal events, though they are also very important. We demonstrate the flag, we solve some global tasks. But we need to bring our relations to the systematic level. It's very important. Let's discuss it today. Now I would like to give the floor to Sergei Volkov. He is the senior researcher at the Institute for African Studies of the Russian Academy of Sciences, head of the Center for the Study of Russian-African Relations, PhD in economics. I give you 10 minutes and I will pay attention to timing. Thank you, dear Irina, for the opportunity to speak here at such a big event. We understand that we don't have much time, so I will concentrate just on the second part of the topic, the change of the direction of cooperation with African countries that happens already nowadays, and that will happen in the nearest future. These sanctions that were implemented by unfriendly countries, and then our contra-sanctions will cause the great shifts in the Russian volume of goods. And for the unfriendly countries in 2021, we had 51% of the Russian export. If we speak about absolute numbers, then we need to know that the sum of money and the volume of goods that we need to reorient will be $350 billion. So this is quite a big sum. And we need to accept that from the point of view of the replacement of the developed countries, Africa cannot help us a lot. Here, Russia will rely, first of all, on Asian countries, but Africa can buy quite a big number of products that was bought before by the collective West. If we speak about the impact of African countries, then we can say that Africa can fully or significantly replace the Western countries in the import of wheat, plastic, cotton, steel, and also to buy as much as possible fish, seaweed, uh, wood. So, of course, Russian countries can also grow the export of carbon, of steel. Just a few days ago, we got the information that the countries, such countries as Tunisia, increased the volume of the purchase of Russian oil products, but that's not for the internal market. Of course, it's for the re-export deals. Here we can also hope on Africa. There can be also growth of shipment of technological goods with a high added value. Especially, we have good perspectives as far as we understand. There can be for transport, for agriculture, and also for electrotechnical production. Irina already mentioned the construction that started in Egypt of the nuclear station, and also for 3 years we ship in Egypt big shipment of Russian wagons. So we have a very big deal, about 1 billion euros for the shipment of quite a lot of wagons, carriages there. So in 2021, in the general export to this continent, we had 11.6%. It's quite a big number for this country, because here the share of machine and technological projects is just 6%. So even at the end of 80s, the share was higher than 20%. Because of the development of the trade with Africa, we can support our production that can then get the impulse for the development. We can expect that in the nearest future, the share of Africa in the Russian external trade, that is 3.5%, will be double, so it will reach about 7%. And if there will be a serious cut of trade with Europe, then it can reach about 10% or even more. Besides the increase of the turnover, there will be the growth of the service, especially the transport service and repairment of telecommunication information services, and also the service for the intellectual property. I would like to speak more about the last part. So actually the development of trade and other forms of international economic relations with Africa. Africa, following the principle of the mutual profit, tries to solve not its own problems that were created by the collective West, but also helps the strengthening of political and economic basis of African countries, and also speeding up the process of their transformation on the way of social economic development. I'm sorry, dear colleagues, please don't start the discussion during the speech. Vladimir, I respect you, but please stop the discussion. If we speak about the strengthening of political, economical, military, social, scientific, and also ecological security of African countries who are allies of Russia in the formation of the fair multipolar world, is the main strategic goal of our cooperation with it. For strengthening of the scientific security of the African countries is the transfer of the competences that our country accumulated in medicine, digital state, education, transport infrastructure, energetic and agriculture. So everything that they really require and what they actually reminded us about. It's not accidental that the perspective of the Russian-African cooperation in the transfer of technologies were described by the ex-minister Maxim Rashka at the plenary session of the summit Russia-Africa, and strengthening of economic sovereignty and technological sovereignty is very important. So all 7 directions of Russian-African cooperation are very important, but I would like to speak about the main element. If you take this element, then we can strengthen all our economic relations. This is the cooperation in the creation of the digital state. And first of all, digitalization of the state finance. It is not a secret that the unsatisfied condition of the state finance in many African countries is the main reason of their weakness and in some separate case of their lack of possibility to work. I will remind you that among the 10 countries who were less active included African countries. So the transfer to the digital process will cut the transaction costs and will increase the effectiveness of their costs and also optimize the profit of their budget and to increase the contribution to the budget. First of all, for taxes, you have 2 minutes left, that are now in Africa the main source of the contribution to the state finance. Regarding the most significant contribution that can improve the position of African countries is the digitalization of the tax service, because nowadays the level of administration of taxes is very low. Russia achieved in this sphere not only significant success, but now is considered to be the world leader. And sometimes we criticize ourselves too much, but actually we really have a lot of things that we can share. And this is the technology, for example, in digitalization of tax services. Not to repeat the first experience of the summit and the forum when they offered to activate the cooperation in the digital tax service by African countries, but then they were not implemented. I think that it's necessary to have the certain form of the partnership of Russia, Africa, or to the committee of the summit and to offer to develop together with the Ministry of the Digital Services and the Scientific Finance Development Institute and the Financial Institute of Economic Security of the Mission and the Financial University for the government of Russia. Very detailed, to represent a very detailed program for African countries with accumulated competences of Russia for the digitalization of the service and a certain offer for the transfer of the technologies to African countries. Maybe we can also prepare a similar offer for digitalization and the reform of the custom body authorities, because it's also a big part of the income in the budget of African countries. Okay, 10 minutes. Last word. So we need to say that it's not something new. It is what was used in the Soviet time very actively, helping to improve the administration of the state authorities. That was done by the committee. So that's all. Thank you. Thank you, Sergey. I think it was very interesting and very practical report. We will discuss it. We will ask the questions. And now I would like to give the floor to Alexander Mizyaev. Is he here or online? He's online. Hello, and I'm very happy to see you. So the topic of your report, if it wasn't changed, Russia, South Africa, current state and perspectives of the development of relations. I would also like to ask you, please concentrate on some certain offers, because you know very well the African Republic and they had very interesting events that were there. What do we need to concentrate for our cooperation to develop in a good way in the interest of our both countries very effectively? Thank you. Thank you, Irina. Dear friends, dear ladies and gentlemen, participants of the conference, I would like to share with you my thoughts that are connected with the current situation. And also, in the end, I would like to share my opinion about the perspectives of the development of the Russian-African relations. So, a few words about the modern condition. Of course, it is difficult, but there are interesting things if we compare our cooperation, diplomatic cooperation with the South Africa, then we will see that the most effective cooperation for the UN, for also the Council of Security, and we will not compare with all the countries, but let's compare with BRICS. It is with the South Africa, not with China, not with India, not with Brazil, but with Africa, the South Africa. And South Africa was already a member of Security Council. There were initiatives that were launched by the South Africa, and I would like here to separate the common projects on we had Russia and South Africa among other countries. This is something different. So I would like to tell you that here I mean just Russia and the South Africa, two sponsors of the resolution. I think that it is very interesting and very effective means of our diplomatic relations. South Africa does not support all our diplomatic relations. I will not speak here about the anti-Russian resolution, but let's discuss the group of the friends of the UN Charter that includes 19 countries. The ideas of this group, I would like to stress this legal point. What is the protection of UN Charter? It's not clear from the name, but actually, we mean here not just the protection of the UN Charter, but we mean here the fight against the rules-based order. This is the order that is based on the rules, and we think it's better to call it the global law in comparison with the international law. If the international law is a horizontal rule, the rule of the equal subjects, then the global law is the law of the vertical subjects, where one subjects then obey to other subjects. And the task of this group, the group of the friends of UN Charter, has a goal, this fight. So to fight against rules-based order and the global law. This is my term and I offer it. So the South Africa is not a participant of this group of friends, but we have good trends. At the last interministerial meeting in New York, the South Africa was the observer, and actually all observers, not the participants of this group, were African countries. Let's hope that we will expand this group. Regarding the situation in which the management of or the head of the South Africa is now, we had actually a mass landing in the South Africa. Ministers of Finance of the United States were there, the permanent representative of the UN Security Council, and also the representative for European Union, Borrell. They had different visits, but they like attacked South Africa, and the heads of the South Africa rejected their demands. So the state TV gave them surprising time, like several hours, and they really made lectures. They actually were quite sure that they are not ready and they don't want to satisfy their demands in the future, anti-Russian demands. But just yesterday, as an answer to it, the Chamber of Representatives actually took a resolution to reconsider the relations with South Africa, a few more legal moments regarding our international agreement that we have with the South Africa. And I was thinking for many days not to forget, so I made a full list of our agreements. I don't have much time to analyze it in many details. I just can give you a few examples. We have a lot of contracts, but what happens to them? It's not clear. So, for example, the culture agreement, sports agreement, tourism agreement, it was signed in 1998, 1999. Then it was validated in 16, 18, and 19 years relatively. There were no specific explanations for it, but it's still the fact. So the agreements were signed, but they did not come to the force. Yes, Russia was not always the reason because the agreements start to work according to certain rules. So if they want to, they can do it very fast. For example, the agreement for energy, nuclear energy, it was in 2004, was signed and came into force very fast, just in the same year. The same happened in 2013 when they signed the agreement, energetic agreement, a wider one. It also included oil, coal, electricity, and so on the same day, and it came to the force. When they want to, they can do it. Regarding the perspective, if we continue this agreement topic, we had a very big problem to work with South Africa because they block just any agreement with the help of the judicial power in the South Africa. And this power has unlimited powers. And the latest example was the blockage of this energetic agreement. Yes, it was validated in comparison with other agreements very fast, but it was blocked very effectively, not the agreement, but the agreement of Rosatom, the development of this agreement.
Alexander, you have 2 minutes left. So what I see as an opportunity, what can I suggest so that our relations would develop? I support the idea, your idea of Irina, on two main pillars, which we can look differently in comparison to West. We don't need to make a competition with the West in what they are best. Your idea of technologies in education, and I would add the third pillar is a culture. On a culture, the people in South Africa, they understand culture more broad than we, and they understand under the culture much more than we. And I also suggest to see in the culture more than just the years of culture and some separate events and activities and so on. We need to achieve the creation of cultural space of Russia in South Africa. My experience of negotiation with the cultural centers of Russia in Africa, they are on a high demand. They are very effective. And at the good management, they become unique centers, incomparable even to much more modern centers as Russia Today channels and others. And second one, we need to establish the Russian South African Scientific Institution. Such institutions already exist inside South Africa, scientific, not their own, I mean. But they practically, all of them are invaded by, you need to understand, whom even the local Africans are well chosen Africans who promote anti-Russian agenda. That's why if the state can create such scientific center, it can unify, and there is a demand for this, and we have such enthusiasts among the scientists who go to the negative events and protect, and they just do it. That's why the demand is high. We have the human resources, and I think that this third line of culture, let it be not a strategic decision, but the tactical one. It should be. We should impose the questions of culture on the summit, the first one, and let it be the from the formal side. But I think that the feedback would be from the side of Africans very high, and South Africans also very high. I thank you for your attention, dear colleagues. Thank you, Alexander. Very interesting report. I would like to comment it later. Now we move to the next report. It's about the cultural agenda, and I fully agree to you. The next, our speech maker, we are not moving out of the region and return the floor to our honorable colleague Vladimir Shubin. The topic of his speech is development of the Russian cooperation with South Africa and other countries of the South African region. Please, Vladimir, the floor is yours. You can even sit at the table, not a problem if you would like to. Yes, take your seat, please. Dear colleagues, the situation is simplified through the fact that our colleague has made a speech recently, and many things are already covered. But because my topic is not only South Africa but other regions, I would say a little bit about South Africa and also cover other on South Africa. I would start with the things which Alexander, and the point is that as far as the institutions are concerned, that's really good. But unfortunately, we are not doing even what was already started. And 4 years ago, that was now the competition of our national National Research Center in South Africa about the joint projects which should be financed 50-50. It should have been 15%. Then there were added 16 plus, and out only two were humanitarian, including our, and all others are on different mathematical activities. There should be conference at the end of the 2021. All our attempts to clarify in South Africa were not successful, and we were not able to carry out such a conference, and there should have been the particular conference of all the participants in order to agree on the continuation of this work. So using this opportunity, because this center is active, as I understand, which substituted the previous organization, I think that we can come back to this question, so that if there is such an opportunity to make the competition, to continue on these activities, and we continue our work, and even in South Africa, to publish that in English. This is the first moment. As far as I fully agree to the center of our culture in science or Russian house. Maybe first we were late, then for some political explanations they were late the acceptance side. It's difficult to understand. What are the real opportunities, especially I'm addressing you? This is academic forum, and that would be tomorrow meeting in the committee on BRICS. And maybe this question can arise there because I don't see the particular perspectives. Maybe there was something, but I'm missing when this scientific forum would happen. And we participated 5 years ago. We participated. This is South African things, and the situation is quite difficult. But in the magazine, in the March, what in April 1 there would be a continuation. So the situation is very, very difficult. But absolutely right, what was told that they are not surrendering against the attacks from upside from Western countries. There were very serious speeches when 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 writing the thesis. Vyacheslav Titokin was at one of the meetings, and there was a direct answer that they were blackmailing, but we would not surrender. So generally, the government is taking the position which is quite beneficial. What we cannot say about the mass media, and already it was mentioned today by Mr. Mizaev. As far as the newspapers, the situation is even worse. And there was a number that 62% of newspapers belong to Western countries, and with all the respect and love to South Africa, let's move to other topics. We are not working with Namibia, not so good. Let's one article with Namibia. We don't have, sorry if I am not right, but we have nothing. The country is perfect. Historically, it is connected to Russia, and vice president of SWAPA and future official candidate of president for the central school. And the general secretary of the party used to study in Ivanovo, where I was born. It doesn't mean that we should consider all this, but there are opportunities, and if we take and there were more people who studied there in Zimbabwe. We are getting out of the stupid situation where on a very high level, especially people were saying that we're not Zimbabwe. And Matvienko was traveling to Zimbabwe and to Mozambique, and also not bad. Everyone was satisfied. Now, a little bit more difficult question. This is about Eswatini. And Eswatini and Democratic South African Republic. And maybe I'm out of the discussion. And we had the tools where the state policy, and we could also express the opinion on the name of the community. Now all the attempts to make such a community with Africa, let alone the economic association, they were not so success. And we love relations with Eswatini and the king, but to express an opinion that there were people killed in opposition. It can be different. That can be done through the public organization. The next one, for the good to bad, we need to say that a lot of centers or special centers appear for Africa. It's also difficult to avoid. There are many specialists for South Africa who appeared, which were not before in Africa. But we need to coordinate all these people, and our institution can play a big role because we have a scientific center, we have a director, we have the president. He's the head, Natalia Zhelitsina, and she's the secretary of the center. And I think that in the aspect of coordination and opportunities and connections between the institutions and many other in the country, this can play a very high role. That's all. Thank you very much. The questions would be later. And in the first block, the final report, which also very important. It is about the trade in national currencies with the countries of Africa and transfer of financial information. Andrei Kudryavtsev. This is an analytics for the support of Russian Expert Center. Andrei, the floor is yours. Thank you. And we have a presentation. We kindly ask you to launch the presentation.
Подскажите, пожалуйста, видно презентацию? А в чем проблема с запуском презентации? Я не пойму.
Can you see the presentation? Yes, we can see the presentation. Yes, we can see the presentation.
Я лично ее не вижу. А где сбоку? Нет, это... Я не вижу презентацию. А где у нас вопрос к нашим...
The question is to our technicians. Where do we have the presentation? It is launched. It's launched not by us. Dear colleagues, in Zoom we see everything, and we can approve that. But in the audience, we cannot see the presentation. Dear colleagues, hello. And to exchange our opinion, sorry? We have some technical problems with the microphone on the stage, so we kindly apologize, but that would be fixed in a couple of seconds. Okay. Let me first of all thank you for the opportunity to exchange opinion and make a speech. And the questions and we should concentrate on practical matters. That's why in the presentation I would like to highlight the questions And the question is reorientation of the flows from foreign countries to other countries. And the countries of Africa are characterized and have the significant potential in order to grow the volume of the trade with the Russian companies. But I would like to start with the problems which mainly exist and our exporters face. First, and the main problem which our exporters face is logistic. And the export of the Russian Federation was going down, the amount of the containers. And if the containers do not exist, the only option which can be considered, which is not applicable for the small business. And as you know, most of the international companies which are controlling the logistic ways to Maersk, MSC, CMA, these are international companies. They left Russian market, and they are left also from the joint project which were logistic operators with Russia. So even for those exporters who continue to work on the African direction, the price of their goods has grown significantly because of the high growth of the logistic. That of course stimulates somehow to increase the competitiveness, but as practice shows, for most of the positions, we just do not go through the price in comparison to Chinese and Indian goods, which are of less quality, but they are on a high demand. And the second moment, the main problem which I would like to highlight is the problem which is in the sphere of cooperation, and there were the sanctions imposed with SWIFT, and by the decree of the president, there was a prohibition of carrying out all the currency operations which provision of the loans in dollars, euros, and other foreign currencies by the partners. So, if we criticized before the Russian banking institutions that they are not crediting the projects in Africa, now juridically we don't have such an opportunity, because what we can do is provide the financing in Russian currency. And we now facing the discussion, which is many academician centers, it's about the trade in national currencies. And in my short report, I would like to discuss how is it possible to carry out in order to talk about the transition in the trade of national currencies between the Sahara. We should analyze the main directions and payable systems which are to the south of Sahara. We should recognize the domination of euro and the Chinese Republic, United States, and other African countries which carry out the export of their products to these countries. They have dollars, euros, and they're used to import and to purchase the products from abroad. Of course, we see the growth of the trade inside the region, but the African bank system is quite weak and not highly developed. Out of the whole volume of paying, only 16% are not getting out of the continent. So, in order to make the Ethiopia bank to transfer to Kenyan bank, first there would be transfer to America, and from America to Kenya. It is explained that between the African banks, it's not well established system of direct corresponding relations, and because of this, it makes a threat on the price and increases the time of carrying out this payment. I'm not going to talk about the high volatility, but generally the African countries are not interested in transfer of alternatives currencies. They are satisfied with dollar currency. But the point is that there is a chronic deficiency, but to refuse and to move, they do not have a direct in African banking union. The work over the solution of the test, there was announced that within the next couple of years there would be established the PAPSS system. but this process is taking much time. And please, next slide. I warn you that there are 4 minutes left. Let's talk more about Russia. The trade in the national currencies between Russia and African countries. In order to make the trade in national currencies, first of all, we should be not at least parity, but 60 to 40 or 40 to 60 percentage in a trade exchange. As statistics shows, with most of the African countries, we have dominating of the Russian export. So with the key countries, almost 90% in the cut of the trade exchange, this is a Russian export, only minimum amount. It's incomparable with the export and the volumes of the import. So in order to establish the demand on the Russian currency on one side and demand on the local national currency on another side, the first task which is to try to balance these flows. And on the next slides, I'm going to tell you more. The next problem is which we have is, despite the African institutions definitely are actively developing and the banking systems are developing actively, if we take the key players of the market, South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, there is 100% dominating of the capital. Most of the financial and banking structures are under the direct control or indirect control of the Western financial organizations and investment foundations. So by any opportunity, but any desire of discussion of any direct interaction between Russian state and commercial banks and the partners, the bank would refuse of this opportunity. The third moment is the system of transfer of financial information to Russia. As most of you know, most of our banks are out of SWIFT. So to transfer and make business activities, we don't have opportunity. That's why the central bank is actively promoting and suggesting African partners and that will be available for the monitoring from the Western partners. That would be a secret channel of transfer, and we can work with Russian sanctioned banks, not being upset that you get under the secondary sanction. Unfortunately, as a practice is shown, even the most politically loyal countries where we have high level of cooperation, political cooperation, local bank structures are afraid to join the system of transfer of, and there is a question of a conversion of political interaction into real steps which financial banks can improve and bring on to the next level. And unfortunately, there is a problem that on the experience of interaction with banks, not many people understand the essence of sanctions and essence of our ideas which we have created with central bank. Next slide. As far as the possible solution, the first solution which is the most actual is the implementation of the transfer of financial systems of the Bank of Russia. This is an avoidable way which unfortunately or happily all our banks should undergo, because this is the system which enables us to stay not cancelled of the international trade with African countries. Another moment is balancing of the trade balance. With most of the countries we don't have that parity, and that's why the Russian companies should actively look on the direct cooperation with African countries, and in experience with interaction with different traders which should buy Ethiopian coffee, which is from Swiss. And this percentage of the companies which worked with Europe because it was more convenient, and if this percentage was going directly to us, that would bring a benefit. And this is the question not only that's not only the question of the experts, but the substitution of the to start to import directly. And moreover, in order to develop our presence and financial banking cooperation with African countries, it's important this question to discuss with the partners from South Asia and Chinese Republic. And the separate topic is also necessary to push forward the topic of leasing centers, which can provide not only the clean of the payment on territory of continent, not to undergo the Western European and American banks. Sorry that I have taken more. A very interesting fact. And now we have a time of the questions. in some comments. Yes, we kindly ask you whom you address your question. Who has the question? Yes, you can go and take the mic. The question is about the... Unfortunately, we cannot hear well the question. It was more comfortable to work with Europe because they could take more volumes, because it was difficult to establish the interaction. That's why we have the plans, but how it would get the real conversion, real contracts, and real import, as you can see in statistics, it's difficult to understand. There's a short comment because I interacted with quite a long time with a company who wanted to implement such a project, and that's about cacao. And Russia is the third in the world consumer of cacao beans and the powder and oil. And we get the, through Estonians was in Estonia. And the question is not that it's it's easier to work with the big traders, but for some of the goods, in tropical goods, we don't have the terminal in the ports. And in the frames of Soviet Union, there was not a question. And Estonia is our, I cannot say even, it's our country to, because of Russia, because you understand, and these two subcontractors, they really make difficult the question of supply of cacao, and we should solve not only the possibility on the usage of this subcontractors. We have to interact directly, but we need also to build up a new terminals, and that also faces a lot of problems, though it's clear how to solve the problem. We need to consider to build such a terminal in the port of St. Petersburg. If this project would be implemented, that would be really great, and that would be a significant step for solving.
Then we can solve the problem of export and import, because yes, as you said, they were sold through the European distributors for many years. And then even if we solve this question, we can balance export and import. Do you have more questions? Yes, please, Denise. Denise Degtyaryov. It's a question to you and to Alexander. Regarding CIPS, the Chinese system, how widespread is in Africa, and do you consider the cooperation with this system? Like to a lawyer, because you spoke about the UN system, the group of friends of the charter, they lose their spirit. In what years? What do you think? What are the main moments? So I think that we need to give the floor to the Russian Expert Center. Okay, I would like to say thank you. the spread of financial payment system that are promoted with China, they were possible because they had direct investments in the bank sector. And I think that colleagues who work with the South Africa, those know that regarding the biggest banks in the South Africa, they include Chinese investments, Chinese construction bank. And if we go to the capital, then they also promote not only SWIFT system, but also their Chinese analogs. We don't have such resources because we have very few banks. And if we speak about Africa, we don't have many of them. Only the VTB Angola, the bank who just worked with very small functions. But we don't have other banks who worked actively and who had then their own offices and the functioning banks. So regarding the cooperation with this bank and the integration of one payment system, this is a question to the cooperation with China and the banks of two countries. So I cannot comment on China because it's not my region. But I think this is a question that should be discussed in the interstate level, and it should be solved by central banks of two countries. And regarding the commercial bank, then they should go to the ready infrastructure. As the practice shows, if the commerce bank is interested and the central banks do not take the necessary measures, then we will not have the visual effect. Just we don't want to miss this financial topic. Do you want to use the swap experience, Chinese swap experience? Because I gave the information how China uses them. And the second question regarding the creation of opening of corresponded accounts of our banks, do you take any steps in this direction? And finally, I would like to say that some of our companies like Uralhim or Alkali, they have the experience, they don't have any problems with payment. They use the certain mechanisms through Moriki and the South Africa. Do you think about the use of this experience, and are you going to use some experience for companies to develop our work with Africa? We will close the financial topic and then we will give the floor to Alexander. Yes, thank you for your question. I will start with your final question. So thank you for these questions. Let's start for the final question. So they don't have the problem because they have the office in Moriki and they have the office in South Africa. It's not the solution. It's just bringing out the Russian capital outside of Russia. Uralhim works with Switzerland. So actually, the capital does not come to Russia. We also communicated with companies there. It's not the solution of the problem. They accumulate their means in other region. So it's a private company. We can have different opinion about it. Regarding the correspondent relations, it's a very relevant question. And the key problem, as I've told you, is in the cooperation with banks. Many big banks who are interested in the implementation of some certain projects in Africa, and African partners are interested in it. But the main restriction is the service. So according to our cooperation with big banks in Africa, even small independent banks are not interested in opening their direct correspondent accounts in the Russian banks because they will go under the sanctions. We were in Ethiopia, for example, we spoke with banks there. Even such politically close to us banks are afraid of sanctions. That's a question how to convert the political trust to real business. If we're ready to work with each other, why can't we develop this topic? Why are we afraid of the secondary sanctions? That's like it. And we have a lot of schemes now. So we are now working with different schemes, also barter schemes maybe. So there are a lot of different details because there is different specifics. And we think that the quantity of groups of goods that can go for export is incomparable. So if we speak about Africa, it can be the industrial complex, and in Russia, it's almost everything. It's agricultural complex and telecomplex, so everything possible. How to calculate these coefficients? That's another question. So we think that it will be productive to create a certain trade house. It's a story that is actively promoted by foreign countries. And it's a question, how should this state to create these companies abroad, not to come under the sanctions? Because if this company will be created by Bank or something else, then next day this company will be under the sanctions. We work through these mechanisms and we speak with the exporters. So we want to create some conceptual vision of trade houses who can be situated in some country and who can exclude export and import, because very often the exporters have a problem not only to make a payment but to find the counter agent. The full trading office, Russian office, in some some favorable countries in Africa, it can accumulate input flows and have the contracts for import and export. Maybe this concept will allow us also to achieve some progress. I hope I answered your question. Alexander, please now you take the floor. So Denise, thank you for your question. I think that what you call the spirit of the UN Charter fell down in 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed, because as what I think, the UN Charter was formed for a double polar system of the world. When the system changed, then this international document that was based on this foundation stopped to be so important. In 1991, there was a big problem. Who are we in the Security Council in the UN? Now everyone says we are like continuation, state that continues the work, but we don't have this concept in the international law. I will not treat so easily these attacks that now are done from Ukraine, because they gave an official letter with the UN, and they sent this letter to the Secretary of the UN and the President of the Security Council. They ask about the legal basis why Russia is in the Security Council. Maria Zakharova, of course, they had to answer like this. She said, no, you will not get the result. But from the legal point of view, our position there is not so simple, because this term was created just on spot. Our American partners accepted it, but they can reject it at any time. This is a problem. And maybe no, we don't need a new organization like anyone, like someone says, but maybe to restore us as the second center of the power. Then the UN Charter will be in bells once again. Yes, it's necessary to have reforms, and Russia agrees that yes, we need a reform. Yes, it will happen, but this is the only thing that we have now in the international law that can go against the rules-based order, this global law. Because now the question is, like Lenin said, or either international or global law. And global law, it will be a repressive vertical law. So we need to keep UN Charter to restore us as a center and to restore this balance. Thank you, Alexander. And I know that we also have questions in Zoom, but I can give you 7 minutes for these questions, then we will continue our work. Who wanted to ask a question in Zoom? Yes, we listen to your question. So I have a comment because you said that it is possible to comment on what is said. It's very good that Mr. Mizaev took a floor now, and I would like to continue with my comment, the topic that he touched on, our cultural expansion and our continuation of our connection with Africa. I spent 6 years in Africa, in Angola, and I know the situation basing on everyday life, so I support the offer that our cultural communication should also play an important role, as it used to be 30 years ago when Russia and when the Soviet Union was present there as a messiah. And what I mentioned here, our relations with Africa were victims of the market, and that's why we then started to organize all our relations at the market level. And we don't have any emotions, we just analyze the profit. I have 2 certain offers from my side. They will be of high demand, according to my experience of working in Angola. First of all, to restore the work of the Center of the Study of the Russian Language on the level of professional education that American listeners can then use to continue their education in Russia. It is a very important aspect because now all the students who come to Russia, they should also pay plus 20% from the cost for the additional year to learn the Russian language. So they want to study in Russia, but they cannot afford it. So if we then transfer it on the territory of Africa to make it for the state budget, and then they will give them the certificate that allows them to study at our universities. It will help to expand the flow of the African students. The second aspect, it is very important, in my opinion, to expand our cooperation of our universities who provide the getting of the scientific, so who provide the education of professional personnel, and also to organize the continuation of education like the Western countries does. So for example, in Angola, we have quite a lot of scientific staff, and the local universities do not educate PhD at our level. There are a lot of magisters there who study in the country and they can get the education in the country. How? Because between European universities, Portugal and so on, they have the agreement, and there are teachers who work there, licensed teachers, and the local universities who are involved there, they have the opportunity to give certificates of the European certificates. So I think we need to consider this question at a necessary level. It will also help us to come closer with Africa at the cultural and scientific level. So the third thing, we are getting prepared for our summit. And I would like to speak with you, Irina, and I would like to express my offer. We need to expand the cultural program, and with the help of the summit, we need to invite African representatives. Those people who are already in Russia, they know us. We need to invite people, dancers, singers. They will show the African culture to us. and then they will come back. They will be enriched by the Russian knowledge, and then they will then share their positive impressions. That's all.
Большое спасибо. Мы
So
сейчас...
thank you.
Есть еще какие-то вопросы? Или
Do we
мы
have more
затронем
questions?
следующие доклады? Да, только один
Maybe we
вопрос
can
еще,
move
и мы
on.
сейчас продолжим.
One more question. Boris Kruzan from Perm University. So regarding the organization of the Center of Russian Education and Education in the Russian language, we have such a task for the pedagogical universities. We already started the work here. We understand that African countries, the educational context is very specific, and there are difficulties to form the context between the Russian organizations, Russian universities, and the universities there. So the main goal here in Russia is the time that we spent here. Everything was very clear, and I hope that it will be possible to speak with specialists, because at the stage of setting the first context, first relation, we already have the difficulties, and we can feel the difficulties that the heads of educational organizations, they are under a pressure, certain pressure. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you. I
Хорошо,
hope
спасибо
it will
большое.
be
Я
possible
просто
then to
вопрос
communicate.
о гуманитарной и культурной повестке.
Speaking about the cultural and
Предыдущий
humanitarian
саммит, который
agenda,
проходил в Сочи, но поскольку я член
differing from the
оргкомитета,
first summit that was in
отдельно,
Sochi,
абсолютно на новый саммит выносится гуманитарная повестка,
so we have
куда будут включены
humanitarian
вопросы и
agenda
научного, и образовательного, и
that will
культурного
include
сотрудничества.
the
Это целый
cultural
отдельный блок.
cooperation. We'll have a big
Будет,
block,
видимо, еще
humanitarian block,
пленарное
and we will
заседание
have
по
big
гуманитарным
plenary
вопросам.
session
Будут
that is
обсуждаться
devoted to
возможные
humanitarian
пути
questions, and we will
усложнения
discuss
наших
different
контактов
ways of
и
setting the
культур,
context
которые
in
значительнее,
culture.
чем вот там,
And it is
возможно,
understood
какие-то
wider than
государства.
some
Тоже
singers,
именно
dances, and so
цивилизация
on, but
и
like
взаимодействие, культурные
civilization and the
языки и
cooperation, including the
образование, все
languages,
туда входит, формирование
everything
национальной
is included
идентичности. Я
there.
думаю,
So
что
this is
будет
the
очень
formation of
интересно.
national
И нам
identity.
действительно
I
вот
think it will
сейчас
be
на
very
этапе
interesting.
саммита
And
очень важно
at the
получить какие-то
level of this
конкретные
preparation
предложения,
of
вот
the
как у
summit, it's
предыдущего
important for
коллеги, где
us to
возникают
get some
сложности,
certain
нам нужно
offers
брать под
where we
внимание.
have the
И все
difficulties,
это
where we
учесть в
need to pay
решениях
attention
будущего саммита.
to consider
Сейчас
everything
мы переходим
in the
ко
future
второй
summit.
части
Let's go to the second
нашего
part
заседания, нашей
of
сессии.
our
И я хочу
session. And
предоставить
I
слово
want
Сергею
to
Васильевичу
give the
Ненашеву,
floor
старшему научному
to
сотруднику
Sergei
Института
Nenashev,
Африки Российской академии наук. И тема его выступления
Senior Research Institute for African Studies of the
2022 год.
Russian Academy of Sciences,
Некоторые аспекты
2022, some aspects
российско-африканских
of
отношений.
Russian-African relations. So, dear colleagues, I hope you can hear me. I would like to make a small report because we are limited in time. This report, so it's not the full coverage of the Russian-African relations. I would like to cover just a few things.
Всем уже известно, что 22 год был
Everyone knows that 2022 was a year where very serious events happened. It was the start of the special military operation in Ukraine, and this year was very difficult for us. We had a lot of changes in the whole world. Unfortunately, they happened also to the African continent. If we speak about the development of the relations during this period, as far as I know, we had positive and also negative trends here. So let's start with the results of the votes, the first resolution, anti-Russian resolution that was in UN. Who voted in which way? So if we take the first resolution on the 3rd of March, 141 countries supported it out of 193 organizations, members organizations of the UN, 28 African countries. So 28 states, it's more than a half of the countries that are members of the UN. More than half of the states that we have now in Africa who are members of the UN. 55 states, but just 54 states are members of the UN. This picture was unfavorable, but if we calculate it in percentage, then we can say that, in my opinion, it was not so sad as it could be, because 73 countries voted for the resolution, and 14.5% out of them were African. And if we add those who did not support the resolution, those also who were abstainees, this was more than half of those who didn't vote at all, and those who voted with their legs, so to say, didn't participate. It's more than 2/3. The picture is not so sad as it can seem at first sight. I would like also to say, what are the reasons of this voting? First of all, unprecedented pressure from the West on African leaders, on African countries. It's not only this. We need to consider that many leaders, many managing elites, they still have the neo-colonial mentality. What do I mean here? They develop the connections with big metropolis. It's easy for them to develop their relations from the point of view of the language. Like Portugal countries work with Portugal-speaking countries or with Spain. French-speaking countries work closely with France and so on. Then it's necessary to say that if we speak about the media environment in Africa, it is fully controlled by the Western countries. I tried to have a look where they take the information. They don't have correspondence. This is mostly Western information agencies. Not only Western information agencies. We also have, for example, the report devoted to soft power. They will say that we have very few centers and so on and so forth. I tried to analyze the website of the French embassy in Angola and to read how do they give these materials connected with Ukraine. Very systematically, very short, where you can use this information and you can copy this information for their mass media. That's what they did, and they formed the public opinion. Not only in 2022, it happened all the time before. Just go there, go to the Russian embassies abroad. Unfortunately, we need to say that they don't have such systematic work. And it's not the guilt of people who work there. No, they didn't have time and possibility to do it. Our embassy in Africa, with a small exception nowadays, it is 3-4 diplomats. So we need to solve this problem. We need to have centers not only on the weekly basis, like big briefing and statements, African people will not read it. But it's necessary to give the materials that we can publish on the website. They are in Russian on our website, but who speaks Russian? So why African people voted like this? They are afraid that these events that happen far away from them in Europe, that they will also affect their interests. In October, in the Security Council, they discussed the question of cooperation between the UN and the regional organizations. So Faki Mohammed, the president of the African Committee, he listed all the problems that African people have. And he said that the war in Ukraine that has the catastrophic global impact also made much worse all the challenges for Africa and increased the risks of instability, risks and war in all non-stable regions on the continent. These are their fears. What can we do in this situation? And I also want to say that these statistics regarding the voting in the first resolution, when these resolutions were accepted, it became more favorable for us. I mean that you have 2 minutes left. So we will not now explain the statistics. Everyone knows it. What are your offers? So I don't have any offers because my topic is not about the offers. The question that I try to cover. The most important thing is what I wanted to say. If you're not interested in statistics, the development in general of the Russian-African relations in the previous years was quite positive. On the one hand, we had the line that was determined at the first summit, and African people were interested that we develop and cooperate. We developed the cooperation on the political line, and we had a lot of delegations and also economic development. We had also meetings of the committees, and if you have a look at the protocol of these commissions, you can see that they were really very interested. I mean, the least commission with Ethiopia, they were so interested in the cooperation.
And there it was mentioned the moments, the topics of scientific transfer of high technologies. That's why I think that. And one more thing, what I would like to say that all the pressure which is upon Africa, it has also the reaction. Just to remember the decision of 42, there was the summit of that where was categorically against in the draft of the resolution which was accepted by the United States of America, considering the role of Russia, negative role of Russia on the African continent. And as it seems to me that despite all the difficulties, there are difficulties, and there was much spoken about that generally, the development of relations, it would continue, considering the mutual interests. In the year 22 was also marked not by a historical decision, but there was a remarkable decision that despite all the difficulties, the present one of the international situation, there was a taken decision of the second summit of Russia-Africa, which would held in July of this year. That's all from my side. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sergey. And now we move to the next topic. This is Russian-African military cooperation. I'll return the floor to Oleg Shulga, and he is he in the Zoom? Yes, I was asking a question. I hope that you can hear and see me. Yes, we can see, we can hear you. Great, thank you very much. And the cooperation of Russia with African countries. First of all, I would like to define the terminology, and I would like to remind that what is World Trade Organization. We have the law about the cooperation of military cooperation with the foreign countries. We have a special law which says that the where military cooperation is about the production and transfer of military purpose products. Military purpose products is covering almost 30 provisions and paragraphs, and almost all of them you cannot go through. But I would like to remind you that the products of the military purpose are not only the material goods and so on, but also the objects for not only for creation and storage, but also for utilization of the military equipment, and also provision of the transport for transfer, documentation, and rights for development of goods. And also there is including the training and preparation, the consultations, and instructors which work in African countries, and they work together, joint trainings, investments. All this included in the category of war military cooperation. Because of this, I would say that cooperation as a field of activity has two characteristical peculiarities. First of one, that it is quite a vast one, and it is less available for the direct studies, because the main goal of this cooperation is the strengthening of the strategic positions of Russia, and only the second one is receiving the meanings of pain. And in the present world situation, to explain where and what we are going to strengthen our positions does not seem to be reasonable. And following the principles of priority of interest of the Russian Federation, the information from official sources is quite limited. And moreover, that military cooperation is not a single activity, it is the process of interactions between the countries, Russia and African countries, which has the peculiarity, and that consists that any agreement in the field of cooperation is the act of mutual trust between Russia and any of other countries where we supply our services. And not always it is the topic for public distribution. The second question which I would like to answer is, do we need to develop that with the African countries? Because if we are limited in time, I would say only quote the words of our President Vladimir Putin from the congratulation of the participants of the African Assembly Union, where it is written that for Russia, the countries of Africa are always reliable and truthful partners and friends. We are accused of the multipolar world construction, but this is based off international rules and laws without discrimination, dictate, and sanction pressure. And as I have already told you before, talking about the cooperation in the field of military aspects, now it's quite difficult because the open data from our official sources are limited. To use the foreign sources, what I actually did, it is also possible, but we need to consider that all the data which are provided there, they are either having the in and not accurate, and they cover two-year period in the past, and there is only tendencies but not the real state of situation in the previous year. in the address of the president to the Council of the Federation was postponed because of the special situation, the present situation we cannot consider, but for present event I made analysis of the data from the Institute of CIPRI and also used the data on the rating of the power of African countries provided on one of the most authority websites, Global Firepower. The analysis, the proper analysis shows some data and tendencies. And according to this database in CIPRI, the Soviet Union, whose successor was Russia, was delivering the products in 26 African countries. After the destruction of Soviet Union, 7 countries did not renew the agreement with Russia. 21 countries continued the cooperation in the war field. 11 African countries never participated, neither with Russia and USSR, where we have at least no information. At the present moment, the war military cooperation of Russia in Africa covers 37 countries, 16 of which never before cooperated with Soviet Union in this field. And out of 37 covered by the cooperation in the military field, 33 are the importers of products, consumers of the military. 4, like Morocco, Eswatini, Burundi, are limited in participation in the military conferences and army games, which are also part of the military market. We also should say that Russia in the sphere of safety and military cooperation is interacting not only with some separate African countries but with collective Africa, and provides the equipment and the armory for the peacekeepers. The most on-demand categories consumed by African colleagues in the frames of the military cooperation are the helicopters, anti-missile tanks, and armored vehicles. But the most volume players, as Algeria and Egypt, they have the Russian tactical anti-missile systems as Iskander, S-300 submarines, and even the space satellites of the double purpose. This is about Egypt and South Africa, and the data of CIPRI do not give the precise information, but still the rough understanding of the price could give me a subjective rating of consumers of the military products in cooperation of Russia and Africa. In the first place, we have Egypt, and the second Algeria, Sudan, Eritrea, South Sudan, Central African Republic, Nigeria, and Uganda. One of very important questions on which we must answer is, does make the influence of the cooperation with Russia and other countries. Sorry, you have only 2 minutes left. Yes, the positive influence is of cooperation. The first 2 countries which are located in the list of the most powerful African countries, Egypt and Algeria. What are perspectives? Then we stop on the perspectives of our future cooperation in the field of military cooperation. The perspectives of our future cooperation with African countries are, in my opinion, are positive. They would slow down, and both of them are objective. One. The first is Russia is concentrated on consumption. And then we transfer some obligations for the delivery of products to Belarus. And second, was what is especially important and negative, that the factor that the collective West in the frames of developed program for the discrepancy of Russia and Africa, and there is outstanding pressure on the leaders of African countries in order to stop the interaction with Russia. Unfortunately, such examples we have, and unfortunately, one of the examples is my favorite, Angola. That's a big pity that in the frames of visit of the summit of United States and Africa in December of the past year, President of Angola claimed that in interview to American mass media, though President studied in Russia, he graduated from the Academy of... Sorry, the time is out, that's why briefly.
Что Лоуренцо сказал?
Yes, we know what Lorenzo said, that the final recommendation, the final remark, that in the frames of military cooperation, we need not to cover the whole Africa, but we need to concentrate on friendly countries which continue our interaction and cooperation despite the biggest pressure. This is Algeria, Egypt, South African Republic, Central African Republic, where we have 1,800 officially specialists, and to decide the problems, first of all, the struggle against the terrorism and separatism in these countries, and because of this, we can make the image of the new Messiah, which was in the struggle against the colonialism, and that would provide our secondary return to African continent.
Спасибо большое, Олег Валентинович. Я просто прошу, чтобы мы все оказались, наши докладчики, в равных условиях.
I just ask you to be equal and to follow the time frame, not to... I don't want to be like a judge who cut your speech. We are limited in time, please count on that. The next report maker is Tatiana Deitch, the leading scientific specialist of Institute of Africa of Russian Academy of Science, and her topic is Russian-African cooperation in humanitarian field, the state and perspectives. Tatiana, please. First of all, I would say, and we kindly ask to switch on the microphone. Well, I must say that the cooperation of Russia with Africa in humanitarian sphere is very, very active, and it was carried out in the Soviet time. Not only it was not that we invested in Africa and nothing to receive. The very important object it was humanitarian cooperation. The medicine and education also, first of all. And in Africa it was quite actively Russian language studied. And there were more than 30,000 of Africans received diplomas on the higher education, and where more than thousands and thousands of specialists were prepared. There were scientific expeditions to Africa, and African specialists also participated. They helped. Unfortunately, the level of relations fell down, and the amount of the doctors who worked in Africa was going down. The position of the Russian language were pushed out by the Western countries, and even Chinese, because Chinese were quite active. And today the task of Russia is to minimize this threat. And what also is done in this field? In the field of medicine, Russia is making some steps. For example, there was, during Ebola disease in Western Africa, the Institute of Epidemiology, named after Gamaleya, is taken in a short period of time and developed vaccine, and they were immunized 2,000 of people, more than 2,000 of people. Rosal has opened diagnostic center at the place where used to be the Soviet Guinea virus laboratory. The center has no analog on the level of the usage of the high technologies. And Russia is producing 60% of the vaccine against the yellow fever, which is delivered to Africa. There is polymyelitis vaccine and test systems which are actual. And this is a lot because through this way the Africans see that Russia helps and they see that Russia is a friendly country for them in the start of COVID. And there was a lot of done, and there were money expressed for humanitarian supply in the period of epidemia. On the summit of Russia-Africa in Sochi, Putin named the preparation of qualified as a traditional field of interaction. This is not occasionally. In the year 2019, in the Russian universities were more than 17,000 of students were learning. Since 2017, we have the program of expert of education. Popularization of Russian education abroad. And in frames of it, it's planning and there were services of support of the foreign students. And I should say that all these things are very helpful, but unfortunately, this is in a small amount. We have work with the young generation, they graduate from the Russian universities. The head of Россотрудничества, Evgeny Primakov, said that it's important that African graduates would be the ambassadors of Russian education in their countries. It's a very important moment, I think, because when the people learn here, they of course would support people to go and learn. Vladimir Filipov said that we accept the African students. The best try to go to Africa, United States, and France, and we need to actively attract the talented graduates of African schools and we're saying quite a lot about the fact that people who learned, they quite often take good positions in their countries, they could work, and we just need to pay more attention. And he suggested a quality choice of the students to provide the system of the bachelors in the Russian education system. All these suggestions should be implemented, and then that would give, of course, fluctuation and growth of education process. And we also must say that it was much mentioned on the forum about the necessity to enlarge the scientific cooperation. And there should be a fully open office of representatives of the Russian Academy of Science in Africa. And Africans also express interest for enlarged the humanitarian cooperation with Russia. We'd like that Russian government should work more closely with us, and we need to enlarge the programs of PhD and to develop our postgraduate activity. The Minister of Education of Republic of Sierra Leone, Gabi Maya, and the Russian Center of Science and Culture. There were 31 centers in the Soviet time. Now we have only 8 of them. 8 in Asia, in African countries. There are 2 centers in Egypt, and they developed the acquaintance with the Russian. In central Tanzania, they have the activities dedicated to the University of Pushkin Gogol, very active centers in Addis Ababa, where there is constantly exhibition, the courses of Russian language, there are festivals, and there is a cooperation with the Association of the Postgraduate of Russia, not everywhere, but The Russian World Foundation is working very actively for the popularization of the Russian language. And there are a set of the countries, like Egypt, Madagascar, and other countries. Россотрудничество and Russian World and also states institutions of Russian language, Pushkin University, carrying out the cultural project. For example, they invite the trips, they arrange the trips of African young delegations to Russia. Tatiana, 2 minutes left. So I'm reading out only main things. At the present moment, Russia is making the preparation for the second summit Russia-Africa, which would be in St. Petersburg. The program would be quite a big one, and that would include the block of humanitarian cooperation and the questions of colonialism, neo-colonialism. In the frames of summit, the forum should give a new impulse of cooperation and to show the impossibility to make in isolation. And of course, I should say the conditions are very difficult. The United States considered the effort of the as a threat of Russia for the interest, and there is a law which is dedicated against. France is also that it is also not satisfied with attempts of Russia to help the African countries get rid of the influence of France. You know that there was a terrorist attack against the head of the Russian House, and before, and there was even information that they were organized by Frenchmen to make Russian people in Africa scared and move away. There was like a terror attack, and of course there is a big pressure. Russia is not strongly introduced in African SME, and Africans should. And the situation is changing, of course, and we should say that we should remember Russia Today, which launched the channel in French, Russia channel, which has an international version, and its programs are studied by the Northern Africa. Sputnik Radio has their resources on 32 languages. And there is also international project Sputnik Pro, supported by Россотрудничество as Mikhail Bogdanov, special representative of President of Russia on the Middle East, to make influence on monopolar world can only the development of the mass media of Russia in Africa. And of course, we must help the Africans get acquainted with the another theory, another share of information in comparison to Western information. And Igor Morozov suggested that if we come back to Africa for a long time, we need to redistribute the resources, and some part we should invest into humanitarian cooperation. So this field we should pay much more attention. And when the West is active, and then the result is. And Tatiana, thank you very much. That's it. I finish. Russia is going to enlarge the humanitarian spheres and consider it as a tool of policy. We have something to share with Africans. What establishes the field for cooperation in humanitarian sphere? Thank you very much for attention. And we have the final report. This is the Russian soft power in Africa. Olga Kulikova. The topic is similar, Olga, and what Tatiana was saying. I just ask you not to repeat it once again, okay? And I wanted also, because Tatiana had some particular suggestions, so at the end there should be particular suggestions. The recent years, the soft power influence in implementation of the external political course of the Russian Federation in African direction is growing extremely. The soft power was understood as a set of tools in order to achieve the external policy goals without application of the armor and weapons, because of the usage of the triggers of political influence that was included in the policy of 2013 and 2017 concept. Now we have the development of the civil society educational exchange. So in the year 2018-2019, we had two Russian African forums. The amount of the students has increased from 9,000 in 2008 up to 27,000 in the year 2021. According to the High School of Economy, I would say that I would like to talk about different aspects of the soft power which are not used fully, but which we can pay attention to. And now they are most of perspective ones. And recently, we with Dr. Krylova have published the article in the Russian University of Friendship. There was an article about the Russian-speaking societies of women and postgraduates in Africa. It can be a powerful resource for support of Russian policy on the continent. In this Russian-speaking communities and societies in the organization of an African continent is existing thanks to the female initiatives of our women who moved to the continent following their African husbands. And now we have different structures, clubs, and they unify the Russian speaking women. And Russian African families, they for many parameters can consider to be the together the development of connection with Russian language diaspora brought the support not only for supportive our policy on the continent, but also implementation of such priorities as support of the foreigners abroad and development of the Russian world. And it's also a big benefit for the development. And Minister of the Foreign Affairs of Russian Federation, Lavrov, said that it should be further integration in the world movement of female and many Russian female unions in Africa. They have a positive reputation and they can provide the development of the Russian African intercultural, political, and economic interaction. Also, it's highly important to remark that in the Constitution of the Russian Federation there is information about the report and that would open the window of opportunities for the many processes connected to our people abroad.
Besides, on the 5th of 2020, we had the order signs that confirmed the concept of humanitarian policy abroad, where they also stressed that it's necessary to develop the cooperation with the organization of compatriots who popularized the Russian culture abroad. It's very important to cooperate with the graduates of the universities abroad. These documents show that it's very important to expand the work with the Russian-speaking people and the Russian world in Africa. So many communities and organizations in Russia, they try to cooperate with the Russian graduates in Africa. The Russian African public forums were supported by the World Association of the Graduates and the Association of Economic Cooperation with Africa will help the support of the graduates to create one internet environment, Russia-Africa. The number of graduates abroad is more than 500,000 people. If we speak about the pro-Russian centers of science and culture, we have now more of them. In 2022, they also opened their offices in Sudan, Egypt, Algeria, and Angola will follow, and Mali. Tatiana also said that we have the Russian world and so on, but it's important to say that these organizations organize different cultural projects and they create a special resource of the soft power and the power of the historical memory. They also develop their relations with Africa. It is done by the Russian Committee of the Solidarity of the Russian population and African population. It's also important to mention the Russian Orthodox Church. It's in Africa. Its missionary activity was activated in the last years. And by the decision of Synod in 2021, the Patriarch Exarchate in Africa was created. The reason was that the clergyman asks them to create it who were disagree with Fyodor Patriarch. And they asked them to be a part of Moscow Patriarch. And then 102 clergymen from this church came to our church. Now they very actively educate people and they send people to Russia, people from Nigeria, Cameroon, Malawi, and the South Africa. They also give humanitarian support. And it's very important to say that the Russian Orthodox Church was the first one who publicly spoke about the falling of the Christian people in Africa. I would like to say a few more things about the information aspect of Russian presence in Africa. So now the foreign researchers say we have more and more Russian presence in the mass media and also in social network. It's a very important direction to strengthen the cooperation of soft power. It's not always TV. It can be other mass media, and they are the leading service in Africa that form the public opinion. So Limon said that France actually is losing the fight for the heart of African people. And they managed then to win in the previous French colonies. That happened because French operations against terror attacks failed. We have very active work of Russia Today and Sputnik in Africa, and Geopolitical Institute says that they managed to give very important information product that is of high demand in Africa, and it goes together with the opinion that they have there that goes against the French presence and to Barhan anti-terror operation. There is one more interesting case that I would like to show to you. African student of Mazhdov State University, Jean Ricou, in 2021 created a social network for African people. It was founded in Russia. African space, it is increasing very actively. It includes African users from different countries of the world, from the African continent itself, and embassies already paid attention to it. It's much easier to get in touch with African students who live and study abroad. So it's like Moldovan Zuckerberg from Africa. It's important to pay attention. It's important to pay attention to their experience and their advice how to develop it, how to make Russia present in social networks and the creation of new social networks. We have 2 minutes left. Okay, yes, I'm finishing. I would like just to say what wasn't mentioned. So the possibility to use the diplomacy from the start of the 21st century. We had a champion worldship in 2016, 2018 football, and then 2014 Winter Olympic Games. Of course, these events attract tourists and they improve the image of the country. They allow tourists to learn the Russian culture. For example, the FIFA that happened in 2018 included a lot of African teams and African fans. And of course, Russian and African people come together because they all love football. Heads of African countries also came to Russia during the championship. For example, President of Senegal came to Kremlin during the championship. And also the opening of forum, President of Rwanda also was present at the forum, and they all said that it's one of the best championships in the history. And in 2017, FIFA then gave the title of the best championship in the history of football. And Russia should attract more African sportsmen to explain for the foreign audience the significant ideas from non-sport events. It's a new experience in Russia, that's why it's not so popular, but in the United States, it is a very important experience. We already did the first steps in this direction, so we maybe need to pay more attention to it. Jumping to conclusions, Africa is one of the world centers where we have the intense cooperation of the representatives of different cultures, religions, and organizations. This is a peculiarity that gives the demand for the big model of the Russian soft power. And it's important to educate more scientists and experts who have deep knowledge in culture and public political life in modern Africa. Maybe to increase non-governmental and charity organizations who work in Africa, in African countries. We now don't have enough of them. Thank you. Thank you. It was a very interesting report. I agree about sport. It's a very important direction. Yes, we keep forgetting about it because we spoke about tourism, but we all understand that it is very important. We should not forget about it. Do we have questions to our speakers? So I think everyone is tired. We also have discussion, and we a little bit. We're not strict to the time, but we already had partial discussion up to the first block. So maybe now someone wants to say something, because I have those who booked the. So the first speech is by Evgeny Kondasov. Do you want to say something? Please. Okay, next time. Who is the next? Елена Харитонова, please. 3-4 minutes. Just a few points. If I had a report, I relied on the report, then I will then give the facts for the statement. So my offer is, I have several offers that I can give as a brainstorm. For the external contra is Russia gives the balance of power to Africa. It's important to remember about it. Not only economics is important, but also that we are strategic partners who gives this balance of power. Then the image of the future. The Soviet Union had it, but Russia doesn't have it. But it would consolidate the whole West. The next thing, everything that is connected with the development of African sovereignty, economic sovereignty, because most of the countries don't work with Africa to create the added value. So it's important for our business to remember it. Also, catastrophic situation in the creation of Russian image. This is also the external and internal control. We need to work with the mass media. What was also discussed today, we need to increase our impact, information impact on the African continent. Work with business, it's also catastrophe, and my studies empirically can confirm it. We need to work with business, and we need to give certain knowledge of the civilization and cultural peculiarities, mental peculiarities, ethics, and so on. It is the topic of Aida. She would also like to say a few words about it. Regarding the internal control, we have to have the internal consolidation of activities between different actors that can be business, finance, and science. Because now we have a lot of examples of the actions that are done. For example, Nigerian Morocco pipeline that is sponsored. We had this information on the 2nd of May. And finally, final thing that I wanted to say, if we are realistic, then the fate of the Russian-African relations is now solved in Ukraine, because Africa really needs good, reliable, stable partner who will provide the continent with sovereignty for the new colonialism. It's necessary to win. Thank you. Aida also is waiting for her line.
Аида Николаевна у нас на связи?
Aida Nikolaevna, are you here?
Аида Николаевна, еще раз обращаюсь.
Are you here?
Так, ну пока Аида Николаевна к нам подключается, у меня еще...
She's trying to join us, and I also have the person here, Stanislav Agureev. Is he here?
Так, видимо, тоже его нет.
No, he's not here.
Я подключилась, слышно?
I'm here.
Слышно, Аида
Can you hear
Николаевна?
me?
Да,
Yes.
слышно, давайте.
Да.
Now it's
Да,
okay.
у меня
Okay.
два коротких
I have
предложения,
two very
которые
short
касаются
sentences
науки.
that are
На-
about
нашего научного
science and
сотрудничества.
our scientific
Первое
cooperation.
предложение
The
следующее.
first one is the
Сегодня
following.
очень много
Nowadays,
говорится о
we
необходимости
spoke a
развития
lot about the
наших
necessity of the
отношений в области
development of our
культуры и науки.
relations in
Я хочу
culture and
обратить
science.
внимание
I
на
would
то,
like to pay your
что в
attention
Африке
to the fact that
наука
in
расколота.
Africa,
И
science is
как
disintegrated,
выразилась профессор
as
из
Professor
Ботсваны,
said from
Мусат
Botswana,
Дюбе,
Musad Dubey.
она сказала,
She said
одна из ее статей
one of her
озаглавлена
articles
«Схватка
is
за
called
Африку».
Fight
Но
for Africa.
схватка за Африку
This fight
идет
for
между
Africa
африканскими
is
учеными.
now between
В Африке
African
существует
scientists.
очень
They
четкая
have
позиция
very
и очень
clear
четкая
position,
группа
very clear
афроцентричных науки.
group of
И
Afrocentric
довольно
people
большая
in
группа
science, quite a big group
западноцентристов.
of Western-centric
Это проявляется
scientists.
на всех уровнях.
And it is
Ученые
shown at
говорят,
all the
как говорится
levels.
Музаддибе,
As scientists say,
это
as Musadibe,
проявляется, во-первых, в том, что
first of all,
университеты работают по западным
universities
стандартам.
work according to the
Особенно
Western
тяжело
standards,
схватки
especially. It's
университетским
difficult
образованием,
for people
аспирантурой.
who have the
Ну,
university
и
education
много других.
in
Это
postgraduate
касается
studies and a lot of other
публикаций,
things.
где
That's also true
отрицаются
about
работы
publications
афроцентристов.
where they
Второе мое
reject after
предложение
Afrocentric
касается
work. My second
работы
offer is
наших
about the
ученых,
work of
нашей
our
науки.
scientists, our
Сейчас
science.
в мире,
Nowadays,
как
in
в известной
science,
мировой
in the world
литературе
science and
российской,
also in
я
Russian
говорю
science,
мировой, потому что это
I'm saying world
очень
science
большая
because
доля
it's
принадлежит
a very big share
индусским ученым,
that belong
китайским
to
ученым,
Indian scientists,
корейским ученым.
Chinese
Так вот,
scientists.
дебатируется вопрос
They
о второй
debate the
модерности.
question about the second modernity.
Сегодня на первой сессии
Today,
уже
as the first
упоминался
session, they already
рассмотрен
mentioned
этот вопрос.
this
Говорилось
question
о
and they
арабо-исламской
spoke
второй
about the Arabic
модерности,
Islamic second
которая
modernity,
в новом мировом порядке,
the new
который
world
очень
order
поставляется
that
западной
goes
модерности.
against the
Но
Western
во
modernity.
всех работах
In
и
all the
зарубежных,
work,
и мировых Африка вообще не
international work and
упоминается.
world work,
И
they
я
don't
хочу
mention Africa.
сказать,
So
это
I
было на
want to
первой
say, it
сессии,
was at the first session,
прозвучал
but
очень яркий доклад
they
профессора
had a very bright
Франклина
report of Franklin
Янси,
Yamisi,
который по существу
who
очертил контуры
showed the
этой,
conscious
скажем,
of
другой модерности,
this modernity, another
в Африке,
modernity, African one,
где ничего, о чем
where
никто не говорит.
no one
Кстати, в
mentions
своем
it.
докладе он
And
говорил о
also
том,
in
что
his report,
Африка
he said
хочет
that
говорить,
Africa
она хочет,
wants to
чтобы
speak.
звучали ее
Africa
голоса. И
wants
он
people
очертил
to hear its
основные принципы.
voices, and he
Каковы
showed the
эти
main
главные принципы?
principles.
Во-первых,
The main
гармония.
principle is the
Во-вторых,
harmony,
это
and
все ценности
also
и все принципы,
all the
которые
values and
окрашены не
principles today
меркантилизмом, а окрашены
that goes not only with
этическим
profit, but
отношением.
that
Гармония
goes
он
with
предлагает в
ethics
отношениях
and harmony. He offers the harmony
между
between
государством
people,
и
states,
между человеком и природой.
people,
И
and
здесь,
nature.
кстати,
This idea
записано законодательно
is
и
also
провозглашено
fixed
в
legally
Китае также.
in China. It's the
Точно
same
тот же
there,
самый принцип
the
гармонии.
same principle of
Вот
harmony.
это наши ученые не знают.
Our
И я
scientists
еще
don't know it.
этот вопрос совершенно
this question is not discussed. And it's a question to our science and first of all to Africanic science. I think that first of all we need to support with all the forces this group of African people who fight Afrocentric Africans. We will listen to them. It will be very interesting. We will support them with all our forces. Africa has a lot of scientific centers. We don't know them. This is, for example, a university at the south of Africa, KwaZulu-Natal. This is a center, General African Center that has a lot of policy. Thank you. That's all. Thank you for your great comment, for the direction that you showed to us from the point of view of the formation of new modernity. This sense, it's the harmony of rejection from the profit for ethics. I think it's also very close to us, to Russian people. We are much closer to African people, and China also have it fixed. And also to China. We are maybe here even more closer to them in comparison with West. So we'll need to cooperate with them. I want to add now a few words. I would like to give a few words to you for you to speak about the Russian-African relations and for us to understand what do we need to do to go to a next level. I think you all know this professor, Kasani Gusi. He's the professor of the theory in history of international relations. Thank you, Irina. Dear colleagues, today is a very significant date in the history of Russian-African relations. 127 years ago, Ethiopia won over Italian colonialists. And why we speak about Russians? Due to Russian officers who helped Ethiopians in this fight. Ethiopia managed to become the only independent country in Africa. All Africans are proud of this victory. And I analyzed the information that we had in Russia, but no one is writing about it. So it's a very important year because this year we also celebrate the anniversary of diplomatic relations between Russia and Ethiopia. Without this victory, Adwa victory, we will not have the official relations, and Ethiopia will not become the window for Russia in African countries. Okay, here we have very positive picture, but I think we still need a concept. What do we do in the future? Even after 2 years after the summit, we don't have the clear concept. How do we need to develop the relations with African countries? Why do we have the absence of Russia in the information field? You said that there were some radio stations in African countries, but it's not enough. Russia Today in France. What is the percentage of African population, even from ex-French colonies, speak French? like Voice in America and BBC and Deutsche Welle. They speak an African language, but we don't have the Russian mass media who use the African languages. So it's necessary to think about it. Thank you.
Спасибо большое. Ну,
Thank
у нас
you.
есть буквально несколько минут. Если кто-то
We
еще
have a
хочет
few
вопросы
minutes if you
задать,
want to say
есть из
something.
присутствующих кто-то? Если нет, то, наверное, я
If
завершу
no, then I
эту
will
сессию.
finish
Хочу
this
сказать,
session.
что, конечно, проблем огромное количество.
So yes, we have a
Наших
lot of
отношениях
problems in
сейчас
our relations.
сформировано, по крайней мере,
Now
ну или формируется в процессе,
they are
находится в
forming
понимании, какую роль
the
должна
understanding
играть
what
Африка
should
во
be the
внешней
role of
политике
Africa
Российской
in
Федерации
the
с точки
foreign
зрения
policy of
политических и
Russia,
экономических вопросов. Но, к
in
сожалению,
political
вот
and
это понимание,
economical
которое
questions.
формируется, было
But this
связано с
understanding that was
объективными
formed was
факторами,
connected not with
вернее,
objective facts,
которые с внутренними объективными
internal
факторами
objective
логики
facts,
развития наших отношений.
the logic
Оно
of our
формируется
development,
благодаря
but
тем
it is
условиям, в
formed
которые попала
thanks
Российская
to the
Федерация,
conditions in which
вынужденная
Russia is
свергнуть
now, that had
свое
to
взаимодействие с
change
западными
its
государствами. То есть мы
cooperation
идем
with
от
the Western
объективного, не
countries.
потому
We are
что мы
coming
это
from the
понимаем
opposite,
и
not
хотим,
because we
а потому
understand
что нам
and we want
поставили
to do
такие
it, but
условия.
because we are
Я
in
думаю, что
such
тут и есть
conditions.
основное противоречие, потому
Here
что
is the
это
biggest
исходит
contradiction
не из
because
внутренних
it is based
потребностей,
not on the
скажем так, нашего
internal
общества, нашей
demands
экономики,
of
вернее,
our
это исходит из
society and
внутренних
economy
потребностей нашей экономики, но на уровне понимания
at the
всех
level
этих
of the understanding
уровней акторов в
and
Африке и
the
их
level of African
государства и
actors
отдельные компании, и какие-то
and separate
государственные органы.
companies, some state
Вот
authorities,
почему и как это делать, к
how they
сожалению, вот
do it, why they
правильно
do it.
сказал
Yes,
предыдущий
it was
докладчик,
said
нет единой
correct.
стратегии. Я хочу
We
сказать,
don't
что
have the united strategy, and
есть на самом деле,
no,
она
we have a
имеется,
strategy.
и самое интересное, что она закрытая.
Actually, the
Я
Foreign
думаю,
Office
что
has
многие
this
органы
strategy,
исполнительной
and
власти, в
many
том числе и министерства,
authorities,
когда у нас
even
вот
the executive
ситуационный анализ
authorities, when they have
ситуации
the
пройдет,
situational
жалуются
analysis in
на то,
this
что у них этой стратегии
university,
нет. И
they say
для
they
нас,
don't
мне
have
кажется,
this
это
concept.
просто
I think
удивительно,
that it's
потому что если
surprising,
она есть, то почему она
because if we
закрыта?
have this
И
concept,
почему
why is it
основные
closed?
условно
Why
исполнители, которые
the
должны это
main
делать, не имеют информации об этом
actors
процессе?
don't have the
Как при
information
предложении, что
about
нужно
this
хотя бы
concept?
часть ее открыть, сделать
There were
какую-то
different
информационную
offers there that
площадку,
yes, we
но,
need
по
to
крайней
open it
мере,
partially,
вот
but at
она
least
существует, но о ней никто не знает.
yes,
И
it
самое
exists, but
интересное,
no
что
one
наш
knows about
институт
it. Our
уже
institute,
длительный период, то есть начиная, по-моему, с
for quite a
2010
long
года,
time, I think
участвует в
starting from
формировании этой
2010,
концепции,
participated in the
знает
formation of this
основные
concept.
направления, что и как
And
нужно
we
делать и
know
не
the main
делать.
directions, we have
Вопрос
them.
в основном
But the
один.
question
А это
is
финансы.
mostly,
Так
A,
же,
it
как
is
по всем
finance.
другим направлениям,
It's the same like with
считается, что
other
вот как это
directions.
само собой без денег должно
Everything
реализоваться,
will be
но
implemented without
Министерство
money.
финансов до сих пор и
And
отчасти
the Ministry of
благодаря тому
Finance,
информационному
until
опыту,
now,
который
thanks
существует
to
внутри
the
нашей страны,
information
в Африке
background
пока
that we
нет.
have inside the
Я в своем
country,
докладе
Africa
говорила,
is not
что в
there.
ту неделю, когда Экзархат был создан, когда
Even at
Буркина
that
Фасо
week when Exarchat was
были новостей об
created in
Африке в
Burkina
нашем
Faso,
пространстве, была
but we have
0,7%.
very small share of
И
news
вот вы
about
хотите, если
Africa,
в нашем общественном мире
0.7%.
российском Африка
That's why
воспринимается
Africa is
абсолютно не
still
так, как она
perceived
должна
in a
восприниматься. Может быть,
different way, not like it
континент, который
should be
очень быстро
perceived, not
развивается,
like the
открывает новые
continent that is
возможности, в том
developed
числе
very
и для
fast
России,
and
особенно с
opens the
точки
new
зрения
opportunities, especially
технологий,
for Russia and
развития,
export of
продвижения
technologies
мягких
and
сил,
technologies,
формирования
promotion of
новых
soft power,
нового
formation of
модерна.
new
Это то, что нас
ethics, new
определяет.
modern. We don't
И
have it.
второе, вот в том числе ту же
And
самую
the
информацию
second
получают
thing,
чиновники Министерства
the
финансов о
officials
том,
of the
что
Ministry of
Африка участвует в
Finance have
информационном
the same
пространстве. И,
information. They are in the
соответственно, у них
same
складывается качество
environment
определенных
and they also have their
мнений.
own
Это
opinion.
такое,
And
что
this
для
opinion is
Африку это выброшенные
that the
деньги.
costs for
Пока
Africa, if
вот
they
это
spend
не
money for
преодолим,
Africa, it's
пока
just
мы
the
не
money
будем
that are
стремиться к каким-то
in vain.
сиюминутным, мгновенным
We need to
результатам, а, к
overcome this
сожалению, у
trend. We
России
do not
бизнес
need to
формировался именно таким
try
образом.
to
Когда
get
он
short
решал
results, but
тактические
that was
задачи,
how
получения
business was
максимальной
formed.
срочной
They
прибыли
tried to
за
get the
вешочку, а
short-term
не
profit,
для развития каких-то
not for
стратегических
the development
направлений.
of
И он был
strategic
частный,
areas, because all business
и
was
даже
private.
государственные компании в
Even the
значительной
state
степени работали
companies
на
still
определенных людей.
worked
Вот
for
когда
certain
этого
people.
ничего не произойдет, мы
Until it
можем
all
только
happens,
собирать
we can
саммиты,
come
рассматривать
together and
задачи,
collect the
вопросы и решать,
summit,
а
but
вопросы понятны.
nothing will happen, though it's all very clear. What we discussed today, even in humanitarian sphere, it's all clear. There was 31 center, but now we have 7 countries. We won't get money for it. They think that it's not profitable and it doesn't work in the system. We don't have the right to trade some changes in the national currency. It's not in our law. What we do now, it's an exclusion. They allowed us to do it. It's a year after the start of the special military operation, but they didn't sign any law. I go to State Duma and the council, they continue to discuss it. I always have the déjà vu. Before the first summit, we collected all together. We said, we need to do this, this, and this, and until now we have all the same questions. Nothing changed. I hope that, and I'm asking you, what can we do now? If we can do something real, maybe this will not be some big projects like construction of nuclear electric station in Egypt. They also have a lot of difficulties there because of the sanctions, but some small things in different directions with certain countries. If we can show something, even we can see our colleague here, even if we give the name of Lumumba to RUDN, they spoke about Vladimir, who said we need more African students. If you want to attract more students, maybe you should at least give back the name to university. When this is not done, the government of Moscow until now didn't take a decision about the renaming of one of the squares near Ramenke to Mandela Square. At the official level, it's all slowed down. And our task, I can speak forever about this topic, but I think that our task as scientists is, despite all the conditions, to study the continent, to expand the data about it, to stimulate the young people who study at our universities, to work more and more with Africa, to have young people who come to our university, who can also communicate with our great specialists, who also spoke at this conference. We need to do it. We need to cooperate at all the levels with all the players in African continent. We need to educate them, to explain to them why Africa is so important for us. This is the main task of our institute. I think that we can do something here. I hope, because despite everything, I'm an optimist. I meet from time to time African people, and despite we left them and we are not so active until now, they believe in our country, they respect our country, they respect Russian people. For us, it's extremely important. It's capital. We need to use it. But it will not be so effective if we don't have some real steps. I would like to say thank you to all participants of the session. I wish you big success of the whole conference. We'll also have it tomorrow. So you can join us on Zoom, join the participation. And once again, I would like to say thank you to RUDN for the organization of such important event. Thank you.